And I think we are sharp on the time. So welcome everyone who already joined, and hopefully some more people will show up a bit later. And today we have got the speaker online because Tristan is based in Montpellier, as you heard. So a little bit, first time I met Tristan in Shishumbana Botanical Garden when he was already working in savannas, but from China. And there we actually made the plan to go together to Shtushtubi to South Africa. So I was hanging out with Tristan and his team there for several weeks. And after that, Tristan moved from China to Paris, then to Montpellier, where he moved to whole his laboratory. And now he actually met again Martin Wolf, and they started to do some analysis together at the IDIF. So there is many more people who are collaborating with Tristan from our department. And his today talk will be about the woody plant structural and chemical defenses against the mammals and insects in this South African natural park. So welcome, Tristan, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the invitation. I'm super happy to present some of our results to your department. Okay, if I have to start, so I put this picture. So if you look at this picture, most probably you see this big elephant, and you would not really focus on anything else. And myself, when I took the picture, that was pretty much my focus. So, this elephant, this special elephant, charged our car about 2 minutes before I took the picture. And still, when I see the picture, I'm not sure I'm happy or not to see this picture because it was a bit frightening to be charged by an elephant. But at the meantime, it's amazing to see this huge beast that still exists and that is weird with a trunk and doing weird stuff. So it's a bit of a mixed feeling. And at every time I've been looking at this big animal, I was wondering, what is the feeling of that plant that you see here that is looking at the same elephant or having the elephant in the landscape? Is it happy things to have an elephant in the landscape, or is it unhappy feeling? So part of the question is whether the elephant is benefiting or a big problem for this plant. So the immediate answer would be to think that the elephant is necessarily bad. But if you remove the big animal from that landscape, the plant that I'm showing that is under the arrow would disappear really quickly. So it's probably also a mixed feeling for the plant. And we designed a lot of research to understand for which plant the big animal could be a good thing or a bad thing. So some of the research that I'm going to talk about, it's absolutely not my research only, it's group research. So each of the results that we've got was produced by a large team. And I'm the only one to sign this talk, but there are actually many people involved. So these are some of the people that were involved in the first part of the talk about structural defenses. And I will introduce a bit who joined after in the chemical part of the story. So let's go to Shtushtubi. So that's a park that you see under the yellow arrow, and that is to the north of South Africa. Maybe you've heard about Kruger National Park. That is a big park for animal sighting that is close to Shtushtubi. So it's roughly the same environment. And most people go there as tourists to see large animals. So if you ask one of these tourists, what did you see today? What animal have you seen? If you say, what did you see? They will immediately think about which animal. They will not think about the plant. And they would probably come telling you, oh yeah, I spotted a white rhino. Or yeah, we've got lucky, we've seen a lion. Or yeah, definitely this elephant was big. oh, I'm so lucky I've seen a leopard today. Very few people will talk about the insects in the landscape, and there's a huge diversity, but not many tourists are going there to see the insect. And the most probable insect that people would talk about would be the dung beetle, because there was some successful conservation program catching the attention of people to how amazing the dung beetle are. So now you've got sign on the road saying, slow down, there's some dung beetle crossing, don't scratch them. But most probably people would not pay attention much to insects. Definitely they would not pay much attention to plants. And this would be your perception of the landscape if you go there, is which large game you've seen. If you ask now the plants, which animal did you meet today? They would give you a different answer. And the most frequent animal that they would meet would be these animals. They would not be the elephants, but they would be the group of bovids, where you have a lot of different antelopes of different type and size. So the top left one is a kudu, is roughly the size of a horse. The top right is a nyala. You've got impala on the bottom right, and a red duiker, the bottom left. The very, very frequent animal in the landscape in terms of large mammal are the impala. So we're looking a bit at how plants defend against this animal. And this is very important to ask this question in this landscape, because the animal are influencing a lot the distribution of species, and they are impacting a lot their survival in the landscape. If you want to read a bit of theory about the ecology of tropical system, you have to read this wonderful paper that was produced by my postdoc supervisor, William Bond, where he's saying, well, our ecology, actually, plant ecology, it's looking a lot at how plants are surviving according to the temperature, the precipitation, the nutriment that you find in the soil. So the conditions required for growth and how they use these resources to compete with each other. So he branded that the green world, and he'd say, okay, if you want to understand the distribution of biome, a part of the distribution might be due to which abiotic condition the plant have met and their growing environment. But if you go to a part of the tropics, you can have large mammal in the landscape, and they can act as a control on the vegetation and influence pretty much the vegetation, and sometimes more than the abiotic condition. So they can be more important to determine what is the profile of the vegetation that you see than the growing conditions themselves. In some area, you've got fire. And when you've got fire, again, you will see a lot of plants that are adapted to survive fire, and their competitive ability would be poorly developed, because the most important thing for them is to survive fire, not to compete with the neighbor. So he was saying there's an alternative to the green world hypothesis. It would be the brown world and the black world hypothesis. So systems that are very prominently driven by the herbivory by large mammal or by the consumption by fire. So if you're in this place with a lot of large mammalian and you're a plant, there are things that you can do when an herbivore is coming to you, and things you cannot do. The thing you cannot do as a plant is to escape from the herbivore. So somehow you have to find a way to convince that herbivore to go and eat your neighbor. So when I'm saying that, of course, it's not the right way of putting things. You are not thinking about how to push away, but through selection, you have strategy that are selected over time that would select plants that are less attractive than their neighbor. So how the plants can become repulsive or attracting to the herbivore is one of the big questions that we're asking. And one of the theory is that you have a suite of traits that would convince the herbivore to change his choice. And when he's facing a plant, so at the bottom here, would it eat that plant or would it move to the neighbor? And what are these traits? The way we see things is that you have two main factors. One main factor is how good is going to be the browse. So when the animal is biting, is it going to be rich and not poison, for example? So if you got a poison in the leaf, it can convince the herbivore to move to the next plant. You've got another thing that we're interested in that is not a poison, it's a digestibility reducing compound. So if you eat a leaf, you grab the resource, it goes through your digestive system, and then you have to extract the protein that are contained in the leaf. So the plant, they found a trick through evolution, and one of them is using tannins. And when you have tannins, it's bind together the protein, so in a way that you cannot assimilate them. So they go through your digestive tract, and then they are going out of your body without getting digested. So the plant are playing a bit this game of making unavailable the protein that they have in their leaves. So this would partly define how good is a leaf for an herbivore. And then there's another dimension that you have to consider is how much the herbivore can take through time. So if you look at the interaction between an herbivore and a plant, the herbivore is biting the plant, and at every bite, it will get a given amount of biomass in the mouth. And the plant also found some tricks through evolution to reduce the bite size. So they change the dimension and the property, the arrangement of the leaf, for example, and that give a small bite to large mammal. Finally, if you want to know how much, you have to know how fast the herbivore can take bites. And here you have two different variables that are important. One is the bite size, so how much you can fit in your mouth at every bite. And the other one is how fast you are able to grab the different bites on the plant. So again, there are some strategy of plants that make the life difficult for mammal and then slow them when they are biting. So why is it important to look at this dimension of how much with the bite size and the biting rate? It's because it will define how quick the animal can meet its daily requirements by feeding on a plant. So if you look at an impala, the most frequent large herbivore in the system, it needs about 2.5% of its body weight of fresh leaves per day. So to get that much biomass, they can do it in different ways, but basically they can either take large bites and then they don't have to be that fast, or they can take smaller bites, but then they have to be much faster. And here, if you take these two dimensions, the biting rate and the bite size, it will define for one species. So I take one plant here that offer this given bite size to an animal and this biting rate to an animal. It will define how long the animal has to feed on this plant for one day before reaching its daily requirements. So in this example, I put a cross here. So it means that the bite size offered to the animal is about a bit more than 0.3 gram per bite. And the animal can bite quite fast on this plant. So after 2 hours of feeding, an impala would meet its daily requirement. After these 2 hours of feeding, it leaves plenty of time during the day to do something else. So they can think about reproducing, they can think about looking for water, they can be vigilant for the mammal. They can go on Facebook, they can do whatever a mammal is used to do during the day. If you now consider a plant that is giving a very small bite size or that is very hard to bite, then you move in this space of how fast it takes to meet your daily requirements. And you can reach situation where after 10 or 12 hours of feeding per day, the animal is still not meeting its daily requirement, so would be losing some weight and being a bit starved. So imagine that you stay at the table for the full day, only eating, and at the end of the day, you are still hungry because you didn't eat enough. If you're on the table, it's fine. But if you're in a savanna and you're only feeding, it means that you're not paying attention to the lion that is also trying to feeding on you. And you're not reproducing, you're not doing anything else. So it's a disaster for the animal. So then we are trying to understand how the plants are influencing the herbivore and reducing either the bite size or the biting rate. So from my two postdocs, I was analyzing how the spiny plants are affecting the large mammal. And the first thing that we're looking is all these different spines that we encounter in the system influence the bite size. And then we're testing a bit how developing very complex architecture with a lot of branches influence the biting rate of large mammal. So I'm not going to talk about all these results. We published all these results, so you can find in the publication online. But roughly what we've got, so we use different methods, and we use experiments where we confronted plants with varying kgs. So here you see a very kg plant, and here a non-kg plant. So the kg plant got spine, got a lot of branches that have spine on them. And then these are creating cages that make the center very difficult to browse for a goat or for an impala or for the antelope in the park. And here's a non-kg plant. And when you expose them to goat, they can very quickly reach all part of the canopy and extract all the leaves. Doing this experiment, we realized that these cages are influencing very much the biting rate of this mammal. Then the question is, okay, we confronted a goat that is not really part of this landscape to plant with different cages. Does it work in the park? So then we move to the park to look at the effect. We've got a lot of questions that we could not test experimentally. So we made a bit of modeling to grow a plant in an environment with or without goats. We did some observation in the park. So here you would see observation in which we compared the level of caginess. So when you go on the x-axis on the right here, you have a plant that is very, very cagey. On the left part, a plant without cage. And then we compared the herbivory rate outside and inside the cage. So this trend that you see here tell you that the more you have branches with spine on it, and the more difficult it is to access the leaves inside for wild animal in the park. We also analyze the community of plant at the park level. And we've got very strong relationship between the presence of large mammal and the presence of cagey plants. So from the plant perspective, the more the animals are using the landscape, and the more it filters species with strong structural defenses. Lastly, we were analyzing a bit how this structure evolved in time. And in this paper, for example, we looked at when the spinescence emerged in deep time. And we found that before the Miocene, we hardly had any spine in Africa. And after the time the Africa touched Eurasia, it changed completely. Some animal came from Eurasia, and these animals are the group that contain the antelope of today. So this is a group of bovids. And after they invaded Africa, we started seeing the emergence of spine in many different clades in Africa. So we've got an evidence that spinescence evolved in Africa as a response to a specific group that are the bovids. So we're analyzing at this pattern at different scale because we cannot get all the answer from only one scale. So basically, if you go to the left of this different line of evidence, we have much more observation at the individual level and at the interaction, and we can investigate much more the mechanism. So for example, I was able to tell that the caginess is slowing down the herbivore. I cannot do that with the phylogeny. On the other hand, when you go on this right part of the different type of evidence that we collected, we've got more and more evidence that it actually matters in the real world. So what we see in the experimental work, maybe it's completely forced by the experimental condition we set up. So we have to check a bit more if that translates into something real in the field, and ultimately if that affects the fitness of the plant and potentially impact the evolutionary pattern. So this part of the research is what I was exploring for a bit longer time, is how the plants are structurally defended against large mammals. And while doing that, we've got a lot of questions about the chemical defenses. So at every time the spines, the message is unclear or something like that, everyone was saying, yeah, it's probably a chemical defenses that you didn't record. And I was thinking, yeah, fair enough. Which chemical defenses should we use against large mammal? We went to contact some of the colleagues that help us designing some of the thinking. And then they were immediately telling us, oh yeah, but if it doesn't work, it's probably a chemical defense, but against insect. And it started being a bit annoying because at every time we've got the feeling of catching something, it was running away from us, because nature is more complex than simple thinking. So we have to integrate multiple dimensions. And then that's how we started working with Katerina about the insect herbivory landscape. And Katerina put us in touch with a group of Martin and the group he was working in Germany, the ID group, to look at the chemical defenses. So let's show you back a bit what it meant on this landscape. So I was telling you, for example, that we can position species according to how much they give in each bite to the animal and how fast the animal can feed on them. So this is a KG plant. And this is the prediction that we will make for this species, that after 4 hours of feeding, a goat or an impala would have enough food for the full day. And this is a prediction that we will make outside of the crown, where the cage is not effective. And now if you compare that to what you have inside of the cage, it's a very different picture. So feeding outside of the plant, it goes really fast. But if you try to access the live inside, then it takes a long time. And we believe that's what motivates the animal to abandon the plant. So if you look in the park, these plants, they're very much targeted at the beginning of the season, where all the leaves are available. But very quickly, the animals are repelled and some leaves maintained at the center of the plant. This is a non-cagey plant inside and outside of the cage of the crown, and it's always available for the animal. So as a synthesis of what we found, we've got a bite size index that was telling us how much you can catch from the plant, and an information about how cagey the plant is, so how densely branched it is, that were very good predictor of how you can defend against large mammal. And then we are trying to go a bit further to think about how the chemical defenses are also part of this large story that we've got. So I told you that we did some experimental work. So we've got some information about which plants the goats, for example, accept or don't accept. So this is one source of information to investigate, to know whether we've got chemical defenses influencing their choice. We also got a lot of information about whether the plants are preferred or not in the park. So this is plot data where we're looking at how many leaves were eaten or not on each plant in the park. And we also got community data for which we know which species of plants co-occur with large mammal. And this is another source of information that we can use to question what are the chemical defenses that can influence animals to move away from the mammals. So then we started thinking about which animals are eating plants. And among the animals that are eating plants, we've got large mammal, the one that we're looking at. There are a lot of insects. And surprisingly, we've got very few information about the insect herbivory in the park. So people come to see the elephant, but not many people came to see what the insects are eating. And in terms of pathogen attack on the leaves, we've got nearly nothing. So that's part of the future research that is coming. We haven't started this part yet, but the idea would be to get a full picture of herbivory in the park. So then what are the plants defending against? Are they defending against the animals that make the most damage? Are they defending against the animals that are the most frequently attacking the leaves? So who would that be? The most damaging one are probably elephants. The most frequent, is it a cricket? Is it an impala? So there's a lot of open questions that we started looking at. To ask this question, here I'm going to show you some of the results from the observation part. So if you look at different animals, so this is a nyala. When it's biting plant, it's leave a very specific scar. So here I'm showing a plant that just got attacked by a nyala. And this leaves typically this type of scar where you've got a clear cutting, sometimes through the blade of the leaf or the base, but you've got several leaves cut together and sometimes the stem cut together. So here you see the phantom of the mouth of the nyala that came and clipped all of that at once. And here you've got a second bite that was there. So because the animal leave different marks, we can separate the herbivory by mammal and the herbivory by insect. So the herbivory by insect, I cannot do that, but Katerina can. And she came with a group to give that expertise and to analyze how much leaves fraction have been removed by insect. I'm not an expert, so I understood a bit what Katerina told me, but I would probably say something stupid when I explain about it. But what I got from it is that there's two different ways of feeding of insects that leave very different mark. And you've got insect that eat the leaf from its side and chew the side of the leaf. And you also got insects that make gallery and dig within the leaves, and they can be separated from leaf scan. So we spend a nice week and something scanning leaves after collecting them from the field. And then this gave us a lot of information about which plants are preferred by insect and which plants are preferred by mammal. So the plants that are preferred by insect, Katerina and her lab spent some time to analyze I think, a total of 26,244 leaves from 51 plant species, and separated what was removed by miners and chewers on old and young leaves and on the upper versus lower side. And ultimately, that was agglomerated into mining insect versus chewing insect. For the mammals, we did count the number of leaves that were removed by mammals on a total of 158,160 leaves. That's very accurate. From 55 plant species. And also, I was counting the stem damages, but I'm not using it in this talk. So I was contrasting the leaves that were removed outside of the cage and inside of the cage for the mammal herbivory, because that's a very different environment for growing for leaves. And after doing this sampling, we've got 48 species in common described for both insect and mammal herbivory. So the first question that sounds very trivial, but maybe it's not, is can we talk about herbivory, or does the herbivore type matter? And if I ask you the question, you would probably say, yeah, for sure, the herbivore type matter. But if you open the literature, you will find a lot of literature review where you've got syntheses that are made all herbivore confounded. If it's a cricket or an elephant in the same paper, drawing general conclusion about herbivory. And does that make sense? I'm not completely sure about it. So let's have a look at it. And then the non-trivial question is, what is important to influence the herbivory by mammal versus herbivory by insect? So after looking at the herbivory by mammal and insect, you can make this graph where you've got the attack rate by mammal on the x-axis and the insect rate by insect on the y-axis. And this would make 4 zones, 4 areas. The top left, the plants that are just preferred by insect but ignored by mammal. At the bottom right, the plants that are preferred by mammal and ignored by insect. At the bottom left, the plants that are ignored by both. And at the top right, the plants that are preferred by both mammal and insect. So if it doesn't matter which herbivore is attacking, you expect to have a strong gradient of plants not attacked by insect and mammal together, and the preferred plants on the top right here. If insect and mammal don't have the same preference, you expect to see a separation on this diagonal from bottom left to top right, top left to bottom right. So insect versus mammal on this axis and more or less herbivory on the other axis. So then we're looking at what compound can influence this relationship. So we're looking at what chemical differences we find in the leaves. And that was done with the great help of Martin, connecting us to the Eco-Meteor team from IDIV, who is led by Henriette Houteux. And there they are experts of chemical analysis. So they're making fancy stuff. I'm going to show a bit what they can do, but you have to ask Martin or some people from Eco-Meteor about the detail because it's far too complicated for me. And we're working also from chemical ecologists from South Africa that are specialized in which chemical compound influence the preference of large mammal. So Dawood on the left and Peter at the bottom. So we are also trying to understand what is attracting an insect or what is attracting a mammal to a plant. And then, of course, we wanted to know how the plants are structurally defended against here the mammal, but also a bit against the insect. So what we looked at the oxidative capacity of leaves. So the ability to induce an oxidative reaction. And this is a very interesting capacity because it prevents the digestion of the leaves by insects. And it's reacting in the pH condition of the gut of insects. And it's not doing that reaction in the guts of large mammal. So that's supposed to be a defense that's working specifically against insects. We're looking at the total phenolics that are supposed to be kind of mix of all the phenols and that are supposed to deter all herbivores. We're looking at the amount of available protein. So this amount is defined by the nitrogen content and the condensed tannins that you find in the leaves. So if you've got a lot of tannins, it binds the protein together, and then it reduces the amount of protein that you could find in the leaf. In terms of attractiveness, we didn't have much hypothesis. So we looked a bit at how much sugar, how much starch, how much phosphorus there were in the leaves. So the sugar and starch are very interesting to get energy. The phosphorus is a limiting thing and has been proposed as very important to determine the preference of crickets. And then we're looking at traits like cage architecture, the bite size index that define how much you can grab if you're a mammal, and an information about the leaf thickness that is supposed to influence the preference of insects. So that's a lot of traits. And here's a bit of the response that we've got. Okay. So here on this figure, you've got a lot of information. The first information I want you to focus on is I was surprised not to see it before. Okay, the first information that I want you to focus on is the white dots. So just ignore the arrows. And the white dots correspond to one species. So one species of plants and how much it is attacked by mammal and insects. So this species here is attacked a lot by insects, but very poorly attacked by mammal. And if you looked at all the species together, what we see immediately is that there are very few species that are attacked both by mammal and by insect, that are preferred by mammal and by insect. So what mammal prefer is not preferred by insect, and what insect prefer is not really preferred by mammal. So that's the first finding that we're very interested to find because it was not clear, at least for myself. Then you've got some plants that are in this bottom corner that are ignored by both mammal and insects. And then you've got one weird species that everyone likes. After that, we're looking at which traits explain this preference. And you could see here that there are traits that are strongly associated to mammal preference. So plant defending with cage, available protein in the leaves, oxidative capacity that is weakly associated to mammals. The SLA, we don't really know what to do. The total phenolics, that seems to prevent everyone from biting plants, and a trait distribution. So then we went a bit further to test how these traits are organized within the plant and whether we could see different strategy emerging. So this is the same ordination moving. And if you look at it, we could identify a number of 5 groups. So here's a group of species that we can identify based on the chemical and structural differences. And these are all the variables that you use to group them. And if we want to make a simple story, this is what we found. So we found one group that is on the left, that is in blue, that is very, very high in phenolics. So you can see here on the right. And that's their most discriminant characteristic is to have a lot of phenolics. The quality of growth for mammal is quite poor. The quality of growth for insects seems to be intermediate. They are not structurally defended. Then we have a second group that have very high oxidative capacities. So this is a group that you see in pink here. And you see the oxidative capacity is particularly high. And all the other traits are not really discriminant compared to the other group. Then we've got a group that we call the low profiler, that don't have strong chemical defenses, that don't have, that are not very attractive, that don't have any structural defenses. Then we've got one group that we call the spiny delicious. So they have very high structural defenses, a lot of spine, a lot of branches that prevent a mammal to get in. They are very delicious for a mammal, so they are full of available protein, and they are poorly chemically defended. Lastly, we've got plants without structural defense, and they are pretty much good for everyone. And they have very thin leaves. So we've got this strategy emerging, and then we're thinking, okay, what does that mean? And it started making sense when we look at who is attacking what. So if you look at these four groups, so the four groups is the one with the phenolics compound. And this is the blue one on the left. And then we looked at the attack rate, the leaf removal by mammal, chewing insect, and mining insect. And this is a group that is poorly attacked by both mammal and insect. So if you are full of phenolics, that make you unattractive for mammal and insect. Then we've got a second group, that the groups that are not structurally defended, but chemically defended with oxidative capacity. And they are attacked by mammal quite a lot, but both chewing and mining insects are avoiding them. So this is a chemical defense that was expected to work only on insects, and the insects are avoiding it. Then we've got this low profiler that we didn't know what to do with. They are not very attractive, they are not very defended. And the mammal ignore them, but the insects love them. And that was questioning a bit or thinking, why are the mammal and the insects going to them? Is it just because they are not that well defended, or is it another reason that we didn't include in our thinking? Then we've got a group with most of the spiny plants that you see here, and the mammal love them. So that's interesting. They are strongly defended against mammal, but the mammal are going to eat their leaf all the time. They are full of protein that are delicious for a mammal, and the insect completely ignore them. So second mystery, why are the insects not going to eat them? And finally, we've got this last group, the syndelicious. So they are attacked both by mammal and by insects. And there's one group of insects that is not attacking them that much. It's the mining insect, the one that dig, gathering their leaves. And that's very interesting to see that, because they have very thin leaves, and actually the thin leaves probably make a barrier for them to make their gathering inside of the leaves. So that's probably a dimension that limits the ability to feed on these leaves. So I was telling you that the spiny plants are preferred by mammals, so they eat them a lot. And this is the result of attack rate outside of the cage. And now if you look inside of the cage, where the cage is very efficient, this is what you see. So the herbivory rate is strongly reduced by the cage. So the defense by spine, it's not defending everything. It's not defending the outside of your crown. It's defending very strongly the inside of the crown. And that works against mammal, but that doesn't work against insect. The insect are going through without any problem. If you look inside of the cage of the other strategy, you have roughly the same attack rate as outside of the cage. So this answer is only for cagey plants. So, oh, I didn't show you something. So what explains this preference or avoidance by insects for the spiny plants? And we believe that we start having some information about the leaf sugar content. So when you've got a lot of sugar, the insect seems to love it, but it doesn't change much the preference of mammal. So probably mammal and insects are not going for the same thing in the leaves, but we need to do more investigation before to conclude anything. These are very preliminary results, so we just started playing with the data, but there's much more analysis to perform. In terms of chemical analysis, so far we're showing you the result of a simple chemical analysis. So it's chemical bioassays that are very simple chemical analysis, but not very advanced. And this gives you a class of compound, how much you have in the leaves, but this doesn't give you which compound. And now we're working with Martin and the group in Germany, in Ecometeo, to use a very, very advanced method to identify more precisely which compound is responsible for deterring mammal and insect. So I will not be able to explain to you all this complicated method, but in the end, it produces beautiful profiling. With the method that we've got, we can try to identify which compound or class of compounds are specifically associated to deterring mammal and insect. So on one hand, we've got the chemical profiling, and on the other hand, we've got all the evaluation of performance about how it influences the choice of goats, how it influences the attack rate of mammal in the park, how it influences the insect rates, attack rate in the park, and ultimately how that results in plant community filtering. So this is a lot of information, and if you want to make it short, mammal and insects prefer the plants with different taste. So when someone is speaking about herbivory, it's really important to precise which herbivore you are referring about. Slug, cricket, a caterpillar, an elephant, and an impala would probably have very different effects and induce very different response from the plant. Deterring this mammal and insect, it requires different weapon. And if we want to start thinking about herbivory, we have to look at the different source of herbivory. Otherwise, we'll always have a carpet under which we put the dust when we don't understand something. So we have to drill a bit our thinking by going a bit complete. That applies for herbivory, but also for most biological questions. So I think that's an important thing to think about defense and strategy in general. And this is preliminary results. If we're working well, and I hope we'll do, we should be able to give much more information and more complete information soon. But if you have some questions now, I'll be happy to take them. And on that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tristan. Thanks really for talk where you summarized kind of what we did and what you are doing. I'm sure there will be some questions.
Also, if you've got questions about chemicals, please involve Martin because he's much better than me. And if you've got questions about insects, please ask Katerina.
No. Yeah.
I actually have a question about plant architecture and physical defenses. So I hope it's an appropriate question.
Yes.
So in chemical defenses, we often see that there is low phylogenetic signal in these defenses, that closely related species can differ tremendously in their chemical defenses. What's the pattern in physical traits and plant architecture? Do you see something similar, or these traits are much more conserved?
So it depends which trait you are referring about. So basically, when you look at the structural defenses against Impala, the one that I was talking about, there are different components. The spine got very, very, very conserved pattern. So a group becomes spiny and remains spiny. It's most of time a recent acquisition in terms of evolutionary scale. So in Africa, it's within the last 16 million years. So it's a recent story. And you've got multiple acquisition, but it remained the same in the group. Once you start becoming spiny, it remains spiny. We recently looked at the acquisition of cage, and it's also very stable at the group level. So once you acquire cage, we've got very few reversions. So there's a strong phylogenetic signal. So that is for sure. Now, this trait that I was talking about, they are designed, they are organized to describe the very stable part of that defenses. And they stuff that is much more variable. So for example, if you look at the branching density, that will influence the result. And within one species, the number of lateral branches that you would put is variable. And this also has less phylogenetic signal. So there are some parts that are very conserved, there are some parts that are very varying. And the one we use here, the one that are conserved.
Thank you very much. Like, especially the information on spines, it's fascinating because we very often work with trichomes, that can serve as defenses against insect herbivores. And in our studies, trichomes typically are one of the most divergent traits. Traits that really differ among closely related species. So it's interesting that in case of the spies, the pattern is actually the opposite.
Yeah, that's a very strong signal.
Thank you.
Hi, Tristan. I have also a question.
Hi, Shashi.
Hi. And you you divide the herbivorous by mammals, insects, and I'm wondering, will the mammals is foraging, will it disturb the insects, and then it will have less insects? I mean, I don't know if you get it. My question is like, it's not divided by the leaf trees, or it's by the disturbance.
Yeah, so there's a potential very strong interaction between both. So I'm very not the right person to ask that, and Katerina would be the best person to answer about it. But basically, the way I see it, but I didn't do research on it, is from observation after the mammal, for example, cut a big stem, the plant is regrowing, and this period of regrowing is probably a time where it's easier to get a pathogen, where it's also less defended chemically, so you expect more insect herbivory. If that effect was very, very, very strong, we would expect to have a lot of plants in the top right corner here. So you would have a lot of species. Maybe we missed that part because we took branches and we looked at branches that looked undisturbed by mammal or something like that. We could have influenced a bit the response. The consequences for insect herbivory of mammal herbivory, that in Shushlowe is not known. And I think Katerina did some similar type of observation in different systems, so she can probably tell you more. But this is an uninvestigated thing, at least in Shushlowe. We don't know how mammal herbivory influence insect herbivory.
Yeah, and also regarding this graphic, I can see the bite size index strongly affect on insects. And how come do you have any hypothesis or explanation of it?
So the one that is weird to me is not the bite size index going there. It's the cage going on the bottom right. So when the cage is going where the plants are preferred, it means that the herbivores are going for it. So the bite size here, the opposite would be to have a small bite size, so very well defended plants. So the defense, it makes sense because the arrow, it's pointing toward less defended things for the bite size.
Yeah.
But from the animal perspective, it makes absolutely no sense if we just think about the defense theory, because the defense is supposed to repel the herbivore and to kind of push it on the neighbor that would be less defended. And what we find, and it's not only in this analysis, in all the analysis that we did in Shoshlowi and also at different scale, the large mammal, they go preferentially to the most structurally defended plants. So there's something in the plant attracting the animal to them. And if you think about it, it's weird. You are both attracting and repulsive. But now we start questioning a bit how that works, because if you remove the mammal from the system, these plants are also disappearing because they're very poor competitor. So that could be part of a feedback loop where the plants also have adaptation to maintain the herbivore in the landscape. If you think this way, it sounds completely like a conspiracy theory, but we've got very strong example of grazing lawn of grasses doing the same. So the grasses that depend on large mammal for the survival, they attract them and they're eaten by them. And we've got the same thing with fire system, where the flammable grasses are the one creating fire by having dry structure. They evolve flammability and they're eaten by fire and they survive better fire than the neighbor. So we might have the same feedback loop with large mammal, but this is still completely speculative and we're playing with it. I tried submitting a paper on it, but the reviewer hated it. So if you're one of these reviewers, stop rejecting it, because maybe some people would be interested by the .com as well. Or tell me why it's wrong, but yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, as usual, maybe had a question. I don't think that the mammals are actually disturbing the insect. Like, if you really meant the disturbance, I think that like when the herbivore is feeding on the shrub, it maybe shakes the foliage a bit, but then the insect very quickly comes back. So it's it would not be a direct disturbance as such. Yeah. But I really believe in what Tristan was saying. Then when the tree is eaten, then it flushes, especially in like wetter season, and then it produces the leaves which are less defended. So there is actually a higher herbivory on them.
So I will not sell too much of the story about fire, but
yeah.
The fire that is the biggest herbivore in the park is also inducing a bit this kind of feedback. And probably soon you will have a talk from the Katerina's group showing a bit more about it.
If we ever get across the fire-hating people.
Maybe. Hopefully.
Okay, are there some more questions? Yeah, I guess that it was very clear and nice. So thank you very much, Tristan, once again. Hopefully see you in person soon here.
Yeah, I hope. On top of that, we start using a bit also this thinking to reevaluate European ecologies.
Mm-hmm.
So I was working mostly in Africa and a bit in Brazil and China, but we start looking at what's happening here. So that would be amazing to come and look at what maybe the big mammal were doing in your landscape as well.
Oh, yeah, they do.
They do, huh?
They do. There is many of them.
Cool.
Okay. So thanks once again, and yeah, have a great rest of the week. And next week we will have the seminar in person. It will be Kariyamba talking and presenting his research plans. Okay. Thanks, Tristan, and see you guys.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.